Hi everyone, Helen Blunden here. I hope you're happy, healthy and well. It is time for a new book review today, and finally have gotten around to reviewing Tolstoy's War and Peace. As you can see, it is a very thick book, and a majority of the people, whenever they think of War and Peace, they think of the size of the book and worry themselves to death that they're never going to finish it. Let me assure you that it is an easier read. It is something that you can open it up and immediately immerse yourself. Now, I'm not going to talk about this book and what happens and all the characters, simply because there are other YouTubers out there who do this book much more of a service and can explain what it's about. Also, if you're someone who doesn't want to read the book and instead wants to see the movie, there is a 4-part series on YouTube. It's in Russian. It is brilliant. It's the closest thing I found to the storyline. What I'd like to share here is my lessons that I have gleaned out of this book, because I'm going to make a big call out here to say that whoever reads this book, they're all going to get something very different from it, depending on, I guess, when you read it, why you read it, or what life stage you're at as well. I think this book is something that can be read and reread by a lot of people, and simply maybe a book that you might change your mind over the years, simply because in this book there are a variety of characters who initially would grate on me. Over time and what they did and why they did, I began to understand them, and in fact I saw some of myself in it. So the first thing I want to talk about is, why did I read this book? I was following Ben McAvoy's YouTube channel, where he talked about hardcore literature, and he talked about this book, and I thought to myself, well, now is the time to do it. He's running a group and they're doing this book in winter, but we're in the southern hemisphere, so I did it in the heart of summer. It was sweltering, but you know, when they're talking about snow and cold, that wasn't what I was getting out of here. So I did the book for that reason, and simply because I did want to get into Russian literature, and I thought, I'm going to challenge myself by reading a hefty book, reading Tolstoy for the first time in my life. My first lesson I got out of this book is, surprisingly, Tolstoy has a sense of humor. I could not believe it. There were times where I laughed out loud simply because I could imagine him writing it with a little smile, you know, this wry humor that he had. I thought to myself, oh my God, Russian literature was always going to be heavy and dark and cold and miserable, and then you want to just kill yourself over the depression of it all. But lo and behold, I really loved how he wrote, his sense of humor throughout it. There were elements I didn't like, but I think it may be a sign of the times. And an example of that is, I guess, his language around women and females, always seen as a bit ditzy, you know, irrelevant, a bit flighty and so forth. That's the only thing I didn't like about his writing, but it wasn't prevalent everywhere. We have to also take it with a grain of salt that he has some very strong female characters like Natasha in his book. So maybe I'm completely wrong. I simply haven't read enough of Tolstoy to make that big generalization about that comment. So what are some of the other life lessons I learned in this? Like I said, I'm not going to talk about the storyline, because the storyline actually spans over battles of Borodino and Austerlitz, and it spans over years, and there's about 600 odd characters in here, although you just have to worry about the main ones who, in the end, you feel for them. They're kind of like your family, and you can see yourself in them, and you can see other people in them. So I'm just going to talk about some of the things that really jumped out at me. And I know that when you read this book, you're going to have completely other ideas of it and other life lessons. Now, I read it, I am 53 years old, so I read it for the first time, and part of me thinks maybe I understood this book simply because I have been through 53 odd years of life on this earth. I also have served in the military. I understood the military terms in here. I understood the kind of characters who were in the military, the type of men who led the battalions. I understood all that. I also understood it from the point of view of the religion, simply because I am part of a Greek Orthodox, and so I can understand the Orthodox religion. I can understand the elements of this. I could also understand history simply because, and I enjoy reading about military history as well. So from those elements, as someone who has been through life, seen a lot of life, and has those similar experience to what Tolstoy was talking about, that's the lens I saw it through. So I've got a whole series here, and I'm going to rattle them off as to the lessons that I learned. The first one is, when we go through life, we obviously change and we personally transform, and our experiences really make us the people that we are at that point in time. Despite there being chaos and constant change and turmoil around us, whether it is in a battle, whether it is in a very difficult predicament or different situation or experience that we're going through in our life, there are elements of clarity and there are elements of beauty that we see. And these elements of beauty and clarity that we see, it's kind of like we then become one with the world, that all this craziness around us doesn't really make an impact anymore. It's just noise. And we see through that beautiful bird, that cloudless sky, or like I saw today, a beautiful moon and the sunshine on a cloudless sky, and I thought, how beautiful is today. In moments of really sheer depression, anxiety, angst, change, turmoil, chaos, we'll always see the beauty in it somehow, somewhere. We will have moments of clarity where everything just seems to come together and you think, oh my God, this is what it's about. This is what life is about. The second one is, we can feel that we are with it, that we can feel that we are right or correct, or we know better than everyone else. At the same time though, we always feel like outsiders. And this was a character, Pierre, who always struggled with finding the right thing, a right purpose in his life, and yet somehow he always felt an outsider. He had come across a lot of money in an inheritance, and yet he simply couldn't connect with the Russian society, so he was at odds. And we also see him out in the battlefield of Borodino as well, where he's viewing the chaos, the mayhem, the battle, the death scenes, and yet he's trying to be part of it and somehow he can't. He also was swayed by the false gods, and I would say this is a third lesson, that we in our life, when we try and find some purpose in it, we can easily be swayed by others. Whether there it is for Pierre it was the Freemasons, you know, for other people it could be other things. It could be influences, it could be we are swayed by money, we are swayed by status, we are swayed by the clubs and the associations that we are part of, and that we're always looking for something. We're looking for a meaning of, what is it that I'm meant to do? Why am I here? Why am I put on this earth? And yet again, Pierre, my favorite character, he was always swayed trying to find the meaning, and he thought he had found it with the Freemasons, until he realized they didn't know what was going on either. Now, another lesson I had was Napoleon. Oh my God, I would read about Napoleon. This book is more about Napoleon than anything else. If you are interested in learning more about Napoleon from the viewpoint of the Russians, from the viewpoint of the people he invaded, this is very interesting. And the reason I say that is because I love France. I am learning French. I had been to France a few times. And so you get to see their heroes from their perspective. But seeing a hero from another perspective, the perspective of the people he invaded, is again quite interesting. I likened Napoleon to Putin simply as that. Every time I would read about Napoleon, I was thinking about Putin and how he had invaded Ukraine. The way I read it was like Napoleon was today's Putin. But another thing that struck me about this book was it is heavily in French, and a lot of the Russian society back then would speak in French, and that's one thing I didn't understand, because look, if I'm completely truthful and honest, which I'm going to be here, is that if my country was invaded by an invader, I wouldn't be speaking their language. I wouldn't care about their language. I would make sure that my language was the language that I would speak to, that I would hold on to my culture, my language. But that's me. But you've got to realize also too that, you know, it was in French, and so I was reading the French paragraphs because I used it as an opportunity to build my own French and learn the language as well. But don't worry about the wads of French in here. There are footnotes that are entirely in English. So what you can do is when you see the French, just refer down to the footnote and read it in English. So there shouldn't be any problems. Another lesson in here was that they had very strong opinions about the different cultures. And Tolstoy isn't the only one. I've been reading Dostoevsky as well, and also Chekhov, and they all make reference to cultures. So there's a very strong stereotypical view of the Germans, the French, of the Italians, and so forth. So I had to have a little chuckle about that, because that hasn't changed over the many years. Another lesson for me was the expectations that not only what our parents put on us, but also society. We go through life and we hold these expectations in us, and we act accordingly, and sometimes we break out. Another lesson for me is that there is hierarchy in everything. I had written it down here because what really stood out for me was the hierarchy between the serfs. I wasn't aware that serfs had their own hierarchy, which was really weird, but they did. But not only that, there was hierarchy within the military, there was hierarchy within the family. And so when you start to think, especially for me in the last couple of years, last few years, actually last 10 years, I've been working in the fields of future of work. We're all talking about the fact that there is no hierarchy. It's more of a wirarchy. Wirarchy being the world is much more networked as opposed to hierarchical nowadays, and especially in work. I think there's hierarchy in everything. There's hierarchy in wirarchy. So I'll leave it at that. The other lesson that I got out of War and Peace, which is in the title, is that war is a senseless act. It's a stupid act. We don't even know why humans do this. It's all ego, it's all power driven. And this became very relevant in a particular scene where Andre, before the battle, looks at all the men who are bathing and he wonders this is going to be the last time that his men will be free and be happy. And this reminded me of a scene of another movie, a brilliant Australian movie called Gallipoli, starring Mel Gibson. It was made many, many years ago, and it was the eve before big battle of World War One, and the men had gone into the water, into the river to bathe. You looked at that image and you think, man, senseless act. All these young men who haven't even reached adulthood, were just teenagers, were all going to die in this senseless, morbid battle. And what do we do it for? All for power, for ego, just simply because some leaders are vain, they're too proud to call it off, and they keep having these, I guess, situations that become worse and worse. War is a senseless act, and it was really relevant here, especially in the Battle of Borodino, which was, yeah, pretty hard going. Other lesson I got in here was how the military state of affairs are mocked, and I had to laugh at that. There was an image very early on where I just chuckled to myself, because I thought, how bloody typical, where they had just finished battle and they had to march and actually be seen by one of their leaders, and they had been through this a big battle, everyone was dirty, but they couldn't parade in front of their leader in their dirty gear and had to spend hours cleaning it all and all shiny and new. So you start to think, yeah, that's what used to happen. Yeah, that has happened to me. Like, yeah, not in battle obviously, but going on exercise and coming back and having to clean up and be in front of a parade in your clean clothes, you know, when you're tired, exhausted. But these are the things that leaders did. Lessons were some quotes here that nobody needs me. Now these were typical realizations that the characters had, but we all have in our life. Other times we might think to ourselves that we need to please people. This goes back to the expectations of society and the parents. Another one is that we can be led astray so easily, and this is Anatoly and Natasha's story, where she gets into a bit of a kerfuffle with Anatoly, and how her parents and family just get so offended by it. Now, I'm not going to go into the details. You can read the book for yourself. How we reason our way out when we really want to change our life, when we want to be desired, or we want to have more love or more affection or more desire in our life. We would reason our way out of it simply because of what we think is the right thing. And this is Maria's, I guess, cast in life with having to look after her father. The big lesson in this book, it's all about love. Love is the key element in this book. Love is the clarity. Love is the distinction. Love is the light, as what Andre mentioned. He said, "Love the light," and I think I took that as being love is relevant to all. It's not about ego. It's not about pride. It's love. And a similar element to that is, and it's linked to the military aspect, was that Tolstoy was also making a distinction between military science and other elements such as art, poetry, love, all the good things. He was saying that above all, there is love. Above all, that we should look towards the skills or the elements of art and poetry in our life, because they are the true emotions. It's not military. The military aspect is really stripped and devoid of emotion, devoid of love, devoid of art. And the people in the military leaders have somehow become lesser men simply because they are not inclined or not swayed by the beauty of art, music and poetry. Some other life lessons for me was around the middle of it, around 665 page, was the Antichrist, and they likened Putin to the Antichrist, and it was the year of Halley's Comet, and it was Pierre who would look into, I guess, the dark arts and try and do the numerology, and he saw that it was Halley's Comet, and he somehow put two and two together that the Antichrist is, I was going to say Putin, is Nostradamus. It's not Nostradamus, although is Napoleon. So I had to chuckle to myself, because at times when there is war in our world, like now, like the world currently at this point in time is in such a fragile position, that we try and think of ways that to try and explain it. And there were times where I thought to myself, yeah, you'd go back to what the teachings of Nostradamus, and you think, is Putin the Antichrist? Is Donald Trump the Antichrist? And so I had to chuckle with Pierre doing this, because I had done it myself too. What are some of the other things? I had to chuckle through it, and I guess that a lesson that I heard, in times of war, you can find laughter. And you might find that funny, but there were times in the battle scenes that the men would sing, or they would banter, or they would joke with each other, and you'd think, man, there's a whole destruction going on around you. People are getting killed. They're having their legs blown off and you're laughing. And I think to myself, maybe this is it. Maybe in the craziness what are you trying to make sense of? It's kind of like you are part of that craziness. You are part of making that history. And this is one thing that Tolstoy in this book kept going on and on and on about. He didn't like history, and he made me open up my eyes, because I love history. I love everything to do with it. And he opened up my eyes with the fact that history, he said, was really the ultimate outcome of the actions of multiple men and women, men obviously in this case, and it wasn't just the ultimate outcome of one leader, of one man like Napoleon. There were a whole heap of other things that were happening that led to history happening. And really, what is history can't be seen from the point of view of one man. It's got to be seen from the point of view of an entire society, entire culture, entire actions that have happened over time. Another lesson for me was old society versus the modern society. How this was a break. This big aspect of this war was really breaking apart what the Russians knew of the old world and bringing them into a completely new world of change. And in some ways, I think War and Peace is relevant to today. But I mean, I could say you should read it now, because we are at that point in society. We are at the point where AI, our technology, is actually taking us into a new world that we don't recognize, or we're still trying to grapple, we still are trying to understand. So we are at that same point as the people are in War and Peace. But then I think to myself, you could read War and Peace at any time of life. It is a book of the ages. It is a book to be read at any time. It doesn't have to be at a nexus of society, because really we are at that point anytime. The view between the old society versus the modern society, and the thinking that that was the end of their freedom as they knew it, the destruction of the old world, was a very big element in this book. I'm going to finally say that War and Peace is a book for everyone. You could read it at any time of your stage in life. For me, as I read it in my 50s, with experience in the military, with experience of the Orthodox religion, with experience of the battles of history, this was very interesting. I loved it. And I know I'm going to read it again. It is a book where it sat with me for a long time afterwards. It was a book where I kept thinking about the characters. I loved the characters. I saw myself in every single one of them through my ages. When I was young, I was more like Natasha. When I was in the military in my 20s, most definitely, I was Pierre. I was someone always looking for a purpose. I was someone who, okay, I didn't go in the Freemasons, but I joined Rotary. I was thinking about how I could participate in my community and how I could serve my community. I joined the military. I had big ideas initially with the military, like Andre did, and that changed over time. I served my community service like Pierre did. I came from a very difficult background like Maria did, and in fact, growing up, I could very much see myself as Maria. But over time, you change, just like all these characters did. They all went on their own personal transformation journey. And now what I see is I'm every single one of them in all different ways. So yeah, that is War and Peace. These are my life lessons for War and Peace. It is a brilliant book. Do not be swayed by the size of the book. It is written in 4 parts. Each part has different chapters. The chapters are short. The way I read this book was in parts, but I found that I was reading it a lot more easily, simply because it was highly readable. To learn about the battles, I looked on YouTube to learn more about the Battle of Austerlitz, and the Battle of Borodino. Also, I looked up about the history of Napoleon, especially in those battles. The other thing I did, which helped me immensely, then this is something that you can consider doing, is after each part, I would watch the Russian movie on YouTube. The Russian movie was brilliant, and it was very close to the book. And there were elements of the movie that I would look at and I'd go, okay, that the book made reference to that, and it could have just been a little part of it, but the movie picked it up. The movie is in Russian. It is brilliant. Each part goes on for about 2 hours, but I would recommend that you don't watch the movie until you have finished the part. I also went through it and I scribbled notes throughout it all, and each chapter I would write what that chapter is about, so I could refer back to it, because after all, this book goes through entire years, and there's so many characters and there's so many different situations that they're in. So simply writing and scribbling notes about what each chapter is about helps you remember these things. So that is my review, my life lessons of War and Peace. If you are still with me after so long, thank you for listening and thank you for watching. It was great just to get my thoughts out on the camera. It is a brilliant read. Please make time to read this book in your life at some time, at a time where you are going through your own personal transformation journey. Do not fear the French in this book. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. Just read the book. All right. Thank you for listening and thank you for watching. Bye for now.